I wake up after about 2 minutes of still typing and find that I've written not several paragraphs, like a paragraph and a half on Boethius, which was coherent. And accurate about Boethius. I was asleep when I typed this paragraph.
You're telling me you can do school in your sleep.
I literally added an extra paragraph. I hit tab and started a new paragraph. On Boethius.
Wow.
You know you're destined to be an academic when you can write coherent paragraphs in your sleep. Hello everyone, and welcome to Theo Table, where angels dancing on the head of a pin can change your life. I'm Aiden, also known as Celtic Catholic Fire.
I'm Julie.
I'm Bea, also known as Bea Culpa, Bea Maxima Culpa on Catholic Twitter.
And I'm Jarek.
Our topic this week is, Thanksgiving is coming up. And that means lots of dinner table conversation. We're a fan of that here at the Theo Table. But how do we have these conversations well and charitably? And how do we have these conversations at all? Because sometimes people like to avoid topics like religion or politics. So
maybe that's a good place to start. In terms of, it's the old saying, right? There are two things you don't have polite conversation on, and that's religion and politics. So, how do we sort of combat that idea? Is it worth to combat? Is it worth it to combat that idea? Is it worth talking about religion and politics at the Thanksgiving dinner table with your extended family who have shared none of your beliefs and are kind of crazy?
Well, as a political science and theology major, my joke is that I'm not allowed to talk at family gatherings. Now, that's not strictly true.
I have a feeling you don't obey that.
I don't obey that. It's not strictly true, because my family doesn't hold to that rule so much on politics. But definitely there's, even when I'm with friendly company who might share my religious views at home, if they don't share them as strongly, which most people at home don't, they don't even want to talk about it in public. Like in a Starbucks, they'll be like, let's have this conversation where no one can overhear us. So I think it's absolutely a real thing that we should push against. Even the most devout evangelical I know back home will not talk about it in public for fear of being overheard. Now, not to bash on New York, but I live in a place where you don't see Republican news on TV in public.
Oh, dear. Okay, granted, Republican. Never mind.
Okay, you don't.
We're not going to do the common news station on people's TVs is not what we're trying to talk about today.
So, the problem is real. The problem is real. Freudian slip. I'm going to Israel. The problem is real. And I don't see my response to them is always, well, why the heck should we not talk about it? It's our conversation. If someone overhears it, so be it. It's not like we're shouting it in the middle of a grocery store trying to incite other people to talk about it. At the very least, being overheard.
Even though some people do that.
I love it when people jump in. I mean, that doesn't happen.
That's true. I do too.
But
the
idea itself that it's impolite to talk about controversy.
Why should we? Because it seems like you're taking a very active position of, yes, we should. Not only should we resist not being able to talk about it, but we should actively talk about it. Why do you believe that?
Because I think even the act of overhearing a conversation about a controversial topic is good for the people overhearing it. Because if they're like most of the population, they're reluctant to have these conversations. Well,
but
not
why
as
is
much
it
with
good
politics.
that they have the conversations such that they're prompted to have them in the first place by you having the conversation?
No.
Because I mean, why is dialogue good? Is that what you're asking?
No. Not why is dialogue good? I mean, that's a questionable question to begin with, depending on your meaning of dialogue. Don't get any of us started. But
there's plenty of bad dialogue. This is implication.
Yes. Dialogue can be done poorly. Actually, that's kind of what we're trying to get at today on many levels. But the point is there something to be said for having conversations about politics and religion with your family just for the sake of having conversations about politics and religion?
Yeah, and I think the answer there is yes. Even
absolutely.
Though I was pressing you at sort of playing devil's advocate. Fundamentally, they're two of the most important things that people can talk about. I mean, what is more important than talking about the infinite creator of the universe or about the way that we human beings are sharing our life together in order to structure? There really are fewer more important things than religion or politics to talk about. And part of, I think, why, at least I diagnose our cultural shallowness in general, partially due to like this over polite or rather non-confrontational approach to both religion and politics.
Polite is definitely not the right word.
Yeah.
I would firstly say that I agree wholly with what you just said.
But polite isn't the right word. You're right.
But no, more so because I never want to pass a chance to quote G.K. Chesterton, because he said quite wittily on the exact subject of not talking about these things at the dinner table that there's literally nothing else to talk about. That
of course he did.
Politics and religion is basically what there is to talk about. I mean, it's good to catch up with family in a broader
shallow
sense.
Gossip. And random shallow gossip has its place.
But also just like catching up with what people's lives are like.
Yeah.
Once you know how another person is doing, to engage with another person's ideas is inevitably going to mean, and should mean, engaging with their politics and their religion. Because the ideas we should have about are how to relate to each other and how to relate to God. Ergo, politics and religion.
Yeah.
But back to the politeness bit, I think that's the other thing to address.
Yeah.
Like, elephant in the room. We have an epidemic of people not talking about this. But on some level, it's because the alternative is not polite conversation.
Yep, it's shouting.
It doesn't have to be, though.
No, agreed.
When you're with family members, unless there's animosity there to begin with, unless you have a historic, long-standing conflict with your sister mate, with your sister
or roommate,
we're gonna have to, with your sister Marianne about, that's such a Catholic name, with your sister Marianne or your Uncle Tom. I actually have an Uncle Tom. I don't mean him. About an issue.
Julie, you're trying so hard.
Yes. If anyone in Julie's family is listening to this, she doesn't mean to insult you.
I love you all. I just bad at words. Okay. I forget. Pass. Start a new thing.
Where were we? Oh.
I'm sorry.
That the alternative is not polite.
Yes. The alternative is every Twitter well, not just every Twitter argument. At some level, it is an outbreath of social media.
But that animosity that I think we're referring to in conversations about this is usually, I think, in public forums, especially it's on the internet.
You don't
when
think
you can
it
hide
happens in
behind
private?
a screen.
Oh, God,
I
can see it happening in private.
I think
maybe
it
my
could.
family is just like insane. I don't think
I
that's
know-
quite the case, but
Yeah, is it there? Can it happen in private? Sure. But I think most of the time, I think it's more likely to be the case that when it happens in private, it's this long-standing thing that both of you know if you start talking about it, it's going to end in catastrophic explosion disaster.
But the question is, how do you start talking about it such that
No, that's the
Yeah.
point I'm getting to. I think if I was
Sorry.
just going to start talking to my sister, who I know disagrees with me intensely about our religion, fundamentally the basis of our relationship isn't the fact we disagree about religion; it's that she's my sister.
Yeah.
And that conversation is going to start well-intentioned and charitably from both sides, and yet there's still hesitation to start it. Why that shouldn't be the case? So how do we get over that? How do we start that?
Well, yeah.
And is Thanksgiving the right place to do it? Actually, that's the perfectly.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we start there simply because I think it connects to the same idea of having these conversations in public, like having a conversation with a close friend or a family member in public on these topics is a good thing because it essentially allows the ideas to spread for anyone who's overhearing, as long as you're having a good conversation and not a loud shouting match. Exactly. The idea of having these at Thanksgiving is that this is your chance to interact with people you should be close to, your family members, that you don't necessarily see as often, that you don't necessarily interact with as often.
Yeah.
If you're talking with, I don't know, if you're like still high school or college age and are living with your family still, you'd have conversations with your sister, brother, parents, whatever, on these topics all the time.
Great. Well, okay.
Yeah. No, the point is you don't necessarily hear your grandmother or your great uncle or your cousin 3 times removed on your grandfather's side or whatever it is. So you get exposed essentially to new opinions and perspectives, or relatively new opinions and perspectives.
New.
Ha ha ha.
Why is that supposed to be funny?
Relatives.
Okay, that was really bad.
Okay,
It was.
On
relatively
all 3 of our parts. But
Exposed to relatively new opinions and perspectives from your relatives, from people you should be close to and be able to have these conversations with. But then also, ultimately, if you're not going to be able to have these conversations politely with your family, then
How can you have them politely with?
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, alternatively, if you can't have them rudely with your family, who can you have them rudely with? But
Yeah, there's that too.
but the general idea being, family gatherings are a time to discuss differences within the family, especially on like really important things.
Yeah, and I think part of why family arguments become so heated is, I think part of it is, Julie, you're right about like the context of a relationship, the context of an underlying long-term conflict or disagreement. But I think also part of it is because there's a perception that that one person is just trying to like prove themselves right or one up the other person.
Absolutely.
Like there's no desire for actually like, to use an Aristotelian term, communal deliberation, like about anything. Like it purely becomes a matter of just like seeing who's gonna knock out the other guy.
Scoring
Like,
points. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is, I think, a deeper fundamental problem, not just about dialogue at families, but dialogue in general in the public sphere, even amongst people. Like it's all, I find it a lot better between college students, but it's still like sort of underlying sometimes.
Even that is questionable, especially recently. I feel like
That's fair.
everything's gotten a lot more toxic recently. It comes down to the phenomenon of what's very, very colloquially known as owning the libs. And the equivalent from the left to the right,
Yeah.
as it is from the right to the left.
Yeah.
Point being, owning the libs is not in principle a good thing to begin with. Really don't own the libs if the libs are your family.
Yeah, don't be drinking out of any leftist tier mugs. No, yeah.
Oh,
Have you seen
no.
those things? They're mugs that say leftist
No,
tier
it's a tumbler.
Leftist here.
It's a tumbler. Yes, there's a big... Stephen Crowder has a mug. Ben Shapiro has a tumbler. They fight about this.
Oh dear.
Yeah,
Okay,
the fact that
well-
you know that they fight about this is sort of sad.
Yeah.
Hey, I listen to podcasts on occasion.
But them?
Plug.
That's
plug.
my judginess.
Interesting political commentary. Oh my goodness.
Bea, what do you think? You're all over Twitter. Like,
I think, don't start beef. That's just to start beef. Really, we should get to the heart of the conversation and really not just shout at each other. But I'm an advocate of more logical, well-reasoned arguments. I just don't see why people are just like, oh, this is my opinion, and it's all value judgment. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
this is good, this is bad.
what
this is
would
my
Jesus
opinion.
say?
Well, this is my opinion. Well, okay, their opinions are different. Congratulations, we are now no further than we were approximately 10 minutes
Yeah.
ago. Yeah.
Well, here's the thing, there's very much something to having these arguments logically and rationally.
Mhm.
I know some members of my family who would say, yes, I can have it logically and rationally. I'm going to be loud at the exact same time, but I'm rational, dagnabbit.
Yeah.
So
That's true.
how do you separate those two things? How do you get to the point where it's reasonable both in content and in manner? Because I think that's important too.
That's fair. And maybe like presuming, this is sort of where we sort of get into a more explicitly theological language, maybe, is like actively seeking to be charitable to the other person, presuming that they're like being honest, that they're arguing for your good, that they're not being like rude or exceedingly, whatever, like, and holding yourself to the highest standard that you can, I think, is part of it as well.
Yeah.
That's not to say that you shouldn't get frustrated or you shouldn't get angry at times, because like righteous anger is a thing. Maybe reserved for very, 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 very particular circumstances, as regards Thanksgiving dinners. Like, don't be running around making whips out of cords and flipping over tables. Like,
Thanksgiving dinner
don't
will be
do that
ruined.
for Thanksgiving.
Yeah, don't ruin the turkey with any noble gestures, okay?
But like, yeah, just hold yourself to a high standard as much as possible. That's something I try to do, and I often fail. But like,
Right.
It happens.
And on some level, it comes down as well to the purpose of the conversation and the reason you have these sorts of dialogues or arguments. As you were saying a minute ago, the reason we disagree is not just to state our disagreement. It isn't even to argue our various positions and reduce it to a point where we have a fundamental disagreement where it's just not bridgeable. You have your principles, I have mine, and there's just no crossing that gap. The point of a disagreement, the point of an argument, is to come to agreement, is to get to a point where you both are seeing eye to eye on something. And I think we lose that sometimes in conversations, especially with family, where we have this opinion that they're firmly rooted and won't change.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I'm going to go out on a limb here. Correct me where I'm wrong, because this is coming out of my head right now for the first time.
Okay.
If the question is how do we get past stating our opinions, hopefully not loudly, and just, okay, we know we disagree. A conversational way, because I think that's usually what happens. People start out in a conversation like this because someone comments something descriptively about the current state of affairs,
Yeah.
like religious or political or whatever. Then the person says no, and then there's another descriptive, editorialized kind of commentary.
Mhm.
I think
Yeah, that's true.
so something happens in that moment, because right there the conversation can become, productive,
Yeah.
or
Not
here's where we
productive.
are.
Because the response can
Um,
either be like, "Hey, this is an error. At least I think it's an error. We can like work together to
Yes.
correct it." Or it can be like, "Excuse me, you just attacked my opinion. Screw
Yeah,
you. I'm
so-
gonna yell at you now."
so
like, yeah,
that's not productive. So
don't do that. Try not to do that.
I don't want to make up hard and fast rules because they're inevitably going to be wrong. But on this particular topic, there are some things that are totally right and totally wrong. But in having a conversation, what if it feels so cliche? Like, I feel like so cliche, but what if before you start on some apologetic horse explaining in a charitably owning the libs, what if you ask them? I think people might be more receptive if you ask them to explain themselves first. Not like
That's
explain
fair.
yourself, but like, oh,
Yeah.
really? Like, what
Why
have
do
you
you
seen
think
that I
that?
haven't?
Yeah.
Like, even if you're really set in your, like, even if
Yeah.
you're really set in your ways,
Even if you're sure that they're wrong.
even if
just
you're
like,
sure that they're wrong, like, pretend, don't like feign to be open, but like genuinely, I think an inquiry into their sources and how they came to believe their beliefs is genuine.
No, this is a good point.
Mm.
This is a very good point. That, and in order to have that sort of authenticness, in order to approach it with that sort of genuine willingness to really dialogue, have a conversation, disagreement well, that requires being open to shifting yourself.
Yep.
Because that ultimately, it may not mean you change your opinion. It may not mean you change your views politically or religiously. But it'll probably mean you change your views of what the other side thinks, at the very least.
Mhm.
And if you're not willing to do that, if you're not willing to grant the other side the ability to, like, define their own position, then nothing productive is going to happen.
Yeah. And I think there's also like a way in which these discussions, especially about religion, I think this is especially the case about theology. Like, part of the reason I think that they devolve into this sort of like, this is what I think, and this is what I think, and then it's just like, or like, there's no attempt to even do the connection. It's just like, this, the two opinions are separate, and there's nothing they can do. Like, part of the reason, I think there are two things. One of them is that there's a perception on at least one side, if not both sides, that the other side is never going to change their mind.
Mm.
Or there's a perception, and this happens especially as regards religion, that arguing about it not just won't change their mind, but like intrinsically can't. Like, there are plenty of people who are like, this whole God thing, like, it's not arguable. You can't argue about faith.
That's an
You can't
interesting
argue about
question.
Like, you just can't rationally speak about God. That's something experiential, that's something about faith, that's something completely separate from reason. And at least I, as a Catholic philosophy major, like, deny that completely. Like, I think any attempt to sort of make God or religion not subject to rational inquiry or thought is intrinsically problematic. Just because, like, if God gave us reason as a tool, why in the world would we not use it?
Right.
For all of the things that it can do.
No, exactly. On some level, religion is a weird case of this. Politics, you assume there are answers that can be fully grasped and
Yeah.
are going to be reachable in principle, if not in practice, in your current situation.
Yeah.
Religion is weird in that regard because religion is supportable by reason, but not reducible to reason. At the very least, that's what you got to be careful of, because
Yeah.
hello everyone on my apologetics YouTube channel who's watching this. I am very much a fan of rationally supporting religious beliefs, particularly rationally supporting Catholicism.
Yeah.
It's a pretty philosophically sound religion, in my personal opinion.
Yeah.
But not everything can be proven philosophically. The church's view on this is that
Good luck proving the Trinity.
Well,
If you find one, let me know.
Yeah. Well, actually, no, don't, because that means you probably
broken
proved the wrong
Catholicism
thing.
then.
Well,
Yeah.
you haven't. You've broken your understanding of the Trinity by
You've also
attempting to prove
committed
it.
a heresy. But,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, see that's the point though. You can defend the faith from the Church's view. Every criticism of Catholicism has a rationally sound response. Every logical criticism of Catholicism fails. That's not to say that every doctrine of Catholicism can be proved. That's two very different things. So, discussing religion then rationally is almost an inherently defensive project.
Mm-hmm.
Because the positive case for Catholicism exists, but it ultimately reaches a mystery. It ultimately reaches God. We're talking the incarnation, the crucifixion, the Trinity, the Eucharist. It reaches things that we can't reduce to reason.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not making the face at that part's perfectly, but I'm quibbling about whether or not discussing religion rationally is purely defensive, because like for example, I positively think that there is a logical proof for God. Do I have it? I don't know, but I think one exists somewhere, and that's not a defensive. That's a very active, positive movement.
Well, see that's the thing. It's a logical proof for the existence of God, but it's not a proof of everything Catholics mean by God.
Well, no, I know, but like, yeah.
But that's important though, in the sense of it allows you to respond defensively to the positive atheistic claim and disprove the positive atheistic claim.
Okay.
It doesn't logically prove Catholicism claim.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
But, and I don't mean to harp on this because it's not the point, but I think I'm thinking specifically in the context of Thanksgiving again.
I'm just envisioning a Thanksgiving family discussing the 5 ways, just like
that would be amazing.
That'd be amazing.
Awesome.
Like, this premise isn't logically sound because of Newtonian mechanics, and then
Newtonian mechanics
Peter
at
Geets
the
is
dinner
like
table.
Cambridge motion. Nah.
Oh
But-
no.
But again, I think apologetics are commonly used defensively, and that is probably where they serve more value. But I think a person can be starting from a neutral spot and not see the rational argument put forth as defensive.
And we don't mean defensive in a negative connotation.
Yeah.
Like, you're being defensive about X, Y, Z. Like defensive isn't like, like upholding your own beliefs.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, in a neutral sense.
Yeah.
And I think in this
Like
case, a positive.
Yeah. Like watching internet apologetics is why I'm Catholic, and I wasn't not.
Okay. Okay, no. It wasn't
My
quite
internet,
because of
my internet
Aiden.
apologetics aren't
Steve Ray.
Yeah, like Catholic
Steve Ray,
Answers, Steve
Scott
Ray,
Hahn,
Scott
Catholic
Hahn, yeah.
Answers. Email the podcast email for a list because I have it. I literally have it.
There
We'll
are
send
very
it to
good.
you.
There are very, very good Catholic apologetics on the internet. That is fair.
which are admittedly better than Aiden.
Okay, that doesn't take much. Have you seen my production quality?
Well,
Hey,
quality's not quite
the
the
things
point.
you say.
I mean,
though.
the Catholic Answers guys are just sitting around a table with a microphone in front of
Well,
them. At least you have,
they're
like,
on
visual
a
effects,
nationally syndicated
and they're
radio
slicing
show.
pieces of paper
also
apart
just
with
sitting around
katanas
a
and, like,
table.
Oh my goodness, the Facebook meme Fridays.
So plug for his YouTube channel, everybody.
Which is ultimately unnecessary because half
You're
of our
watching
viewers
this
come
on
from
the
my
YouTube
YouTube channel.
channel.
So
Oh yeah, you'll
Please
somebody
go
watch.
like and share his apologetic videos with your family and friends in advance of Thanksgiving.
So you can have
Over
the topic
Thanksgiving.
discussed.
At
Yeah.
Thanksgiving.
Yes, if you need controversial things to say at Thanksgiving, look at my videos and look at Lutheran satire.
Oh boy.
Oh,
Wow.
I guess they could look at us for some things, but we're not that polemical.
No.
Yeah.
No, we're not.
We have good dialogue.
We should become church militant.
No, we shouldn't. No, we really shouldn't.
Oh, we should become the church militant, not church militant. Oh, yeah. Let's
Be
not
the
talk
church
about
militant,
Catholic.
not church
Yeah.
militant. Next time.
So, like, here's a. I mean, like, there are institutions, many of them, which are examples within the Catholic Church of dialogue being done not particularly well. Of like the weird Catholic Twitter sort of like crazy yelling at each other back and forth, calling each other heretics very liberally.
Yeah,
Yeah.
The Catholic online equivalent of owning the libs is Dave's fault. Yes,
Yeah.
I'm not going to contest this.
Don't quite slide into that category because that's
Don't slide anywhere. Just hard. Don't. This is a hard command. Do not be a Deus Vult hardcore rad trad. Can't have a positive conversation. Can only attack heretics on the internet. person. That is not constructive. I lived in that world for a number of years. I was not that world. Don't do it. It turns people away from the faith.
And it's also
Don't
just
do it.
wrong. Like, even
Right.
independently, I mean, like, speaking the truth also turns people away from the faith, because some people just don't like the truth. But, like,
Well,
it's just a wrong way of approaching those sorts of issues.
Don't tell. So the truth is a two-edged sword, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't mean to stab somebody with it.
Oh dear. Okay. I wasn't quite where I thought you were going to go with that.
Stabbing people with the truth.
Like St. Paul, like the sword is there. If you stab the person with it, I don't think they're gonna absorb both. They're gonna absorb
Speak
both
softly and
ends
carry
of
the
sword.
double-edged sword of truth.
But
Don't
they're gonna
use the
die before
double-edged
they can
sword of
tell
truth.
us.
Speak softly. Okay, to bring this back on track a little, just a little, we have talked a good bit about, I mean, this general line of discussion brings up a good point, though, because, yes, we've talked a bit about how to have these conversations and not be too harsh, and not come across as super angry and unable to actually engage with the other person's ideas, and maybe ultimately convince them a little of something, or ultimately plant the seeds of something.
Yeah, at least convince them that you're not an insane whack job.
Well, right. I've recently had a really good example of this, where I just occasionally talk to some of my friends from high school about Catholicism, and one in particular, and she, not 2 weeks ago, or not a couple days ago even, she's in RCIA now. Just, I don't know her whole story behind that, but at the very least, she's talked to me about some of the things she disagreed with Catholicism about. And being able to have those conversations well is important. It actually can slowly change people's perspective on things.
Yeah.
The question, though, the question is just that, how do we resist the impulse to go full Deus Vult, but still... Because there's an impulse to that, and there's a righteous impulse to that, to defend things vigorously.
Parousia,
How do we be vigorous in our defense without shutting people away?
And I think it'd be good to address at the same time. One side of that coin is how do you not be super vigorous. The other side of that coin is some people don't talk about these things because they think they might believe something, but they can't defend it. Both sides of that.
Well, as regards the whole vigorous thing, like, there's a balance to be had between, on one hand, parousia is a Christian virtue. Parousia is like the Greek word for, like, bold speech is sort of the way that St. Paul talks about it. Like, it's like, you can talk about, like, speaking the truth to power or saying what needs to be said, stuff like that. Like, that is a Christian virtue. Pope Francis, for example, in 2014, when Saints John Paul II and John XXIII were canonized, talked about them both possessing the parousia of the Holy Spirit. They spoke truth as truth needed to be said. But I think part of that is, the other side of the coin is that truth as truth needs to be said. Like, the end of the argument is still to convince people, or not convince people, but like to come to an agreement, to sharpen the ideas that are being exchanged, whether it's your ideas or the other person's ideas that end up being adopted. And so, like, there is a sense in which we do need to speak the truth, but we need to speak it in a context which isn't this, like, angry, virulent, you're just wrong sort of way. We need to speak the truth in a way that is appealing to people. Because in the end, we want people to have the truth.
Right. And I think, actually, in terms of conveying the truth in the way the truth needs to be conveyed, that's important because that can be different for different truths you want to get across.
Yeah, or different circumstances.
Well, right. But I'm thinking, especially in terms of religion and politics, religion more so than politics, but politics helps wonders as well. You gotta live this stuff. Having the argument is good. Having the argument well and charitably and trying in such a manner to try and come to an agreement is good. But the most effective form of religious argument comes from living out what you claim to believe.
Yeah, actually, I think that's helpful advice for the other side of the coin, as I was saying earlier, too. I don't know for sure, but when I do have these conversations with people who know me, like, back home, there's, like, a back home Julie who doesn't act differently but says different things. But
speech, not action?
But this is the point, though. I think, like...
It's a joke, don't worry.
No, but, if you're hesitant to say something, because, like, what am I even going to say? Can I even argue well? Like, I shouldn't bring up the argument at all. because they're just gonna like steamroll me, and that's bad for the faith, right? And
Yeah.
personally, not pleasant.
Well, that too. Yeah.
I think part of that is if you're living it, like people take notice of that. Like occasionally, you'll have a Facebook Messenger conversation with like a cousin or something, and the comments that come afterwards, like it's much better received in light of them seeing just your Facebook, because like it's different at home. Well, at least she goes to the March for Life.
Yeah.
And coming to back that up, like the people you're speaking to at Thanksgiving are people who know about your life somewhat. You're not expected to be like expert apologist or like political expert talking head for whatever you take that as.
Yeah.
They know that you're their 20-year-old cousin or your 16-year-old niece.
Yeah.
You don't have to have all the answers. What's the scripture about like the Holy Spirit giving the words you need?
Well, that's about prayer, I believe.
No,
it's
it's also about speaking to people.
Yeah.
About evangelization.
I don't
Okay.
remember
But does
exactly
anybody
what
know
it
what it
is.
is?
But it was like, prepare not your words beforehand, for the Spirit will grant you what you need. or
Oh,
something
yeah,
along
yeah,
those
that,
lines.
Yeah.
Prepare not your defense beforehand, because they're
Yeah.
talking about...
Like, don't try to,
Yeah.
it's not, nobody's expecting you to be an expert. And ultimately, you're never going to argue
Unless you
somebody.
claim to be an expert.
Unless you are
There's-
legitimately, If you're an expert, go for it. Like,
If you act like an expert and you act like you know more than you in fact do, that becomes a problem as well, which I'm guilty of that often. So that's not a shade on other people; it's a shade on myself.
Yeah.
Well, this is actually a good scenario I don't think we've considered yet in terms of why people don't have these conversations. What do we say to people who aren't used to having these conversations on sort of the Catholic side of things and are worried about not being convincing or worried about being swayed away from what they believe because they don't know how to defend it well? What is our approach to people who want to be prepared for these sorts of discussions but don't feel like they are?
watch.
So
Personally, no, seriously,
Yeah.
thinking back now, like retrospectively, I realize I learned more from like my formal catechesis than I gave it credit for at the time. But the way I learned how to argue anything for Catholicism is by watching other people do it on the internet or listening to other people do it on the internet. Like, before I started in the major, like, all of the Catholic knowledge came from the internet.
Yeah, that's true.
Catholic answers, invaluable. For real. Especially their, like,
Yeah.
bulleted lists. And also, there are other people, they're hard to find, but there are niches on the internet where people do have charitable conversations where you can talk to the evangelicals and the Lutherans and the atheists on the internet.
Catholic
I found
iFunny.
them. It's Catholic iFunny, guys. I was there. The community kind of died, so find a different one because sorry guys, sorry iFunny, but find another one. There's Facebook groups. They do exist. Like if you look for discussion groups, some of them are legitimate. Because it can be hard to find people in real life to practice, not practice in the sense of practice, but like you end up getting practice
To have
having these conversations.
Yeah. Yep. And like, I think that's especially the case if, and
just
Julie
gotta
sort of
try it.
alluded to this, like, especially the case if you're not in a community with a lot of other people who share your values or your beliefs. You're in that position, I'm in that position, like, it's difficult. It's very hard. But at least I think the grace that I've gotten out of being in that position is that, like, when you interact with other people and you argue about these things, or you hear arguments about these things, arguments in, like, a discussion sense, not in the yelling sense, like, it sharpens your own ideas. It gives you an ability and a confidence to go out and do something similar. And that, I think, is one of the biggest gifts that I have of growing up in an area, in a culture, which more or less holds the opposite of my values, is that I'm able to, like, I'm able to engage with them on a level of par, like, as an equal in a sense, and not just, like, shout things back at them, and not, like, be forced to engage, actively, intellectually engage with the material.
So yeah. So ultimately, then that's why Thanksgiving political and religious conversations, to bring it all right back around, are worth having and worth doing well, because it doesn't just help the people you're talking with. If you can try and convince them toward and bring them closer to the truth, it helps you. It helps your own understanding of your faith. It helps your own ability to defend the faith.
It just gives you tools, like, for your reasoning capacities. Like, yeah.
So
Yeah.
go out there in a couple of days and have these arguments and have them charitably.
Yeah.
Don't own the libs. Don't go Dave's fault. And if everyone abides by those rules, I think we'll all get along pretty well.
I think you'll have a memorable Thanksgiving in a
Yes.
good sense.
Yes.
Okay.
On that note, we will conclude with the prayer of St. Thomas Aquinas. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Grant us, O Lord, minds to know you, hearts to seek you, wisdom to find you, conduct pleasing to you, faithful perseverance in waiting for you, and a hope of finally embracing you.
Amen.